There's no question that Into the Spiderverse is a great movie. However, when it comes to live-action Marvel flicks, Sony is a four-letter word. Regardless, we're going to do our best and not boot the second entrant out of the Sinister Six party. Hang on to your hats, everyone, because it's Morbin time as we try to prove to you that Morbius is not that bad. Welcome to this edition of It's Not That Bad, the podcast that looks for A grades in B movies. Now look, dear listeners, we knew this day was going to come. We knew that adventure was going to happen, and that day has arrived. We have to talk about Morbius. And here to join me on our journey of pain through this episode, my co-host for Just Another Nerd Show, Kevin Hilsden's back on It's Not That Bad. Kev, welcome back to the show. How are you?
Thank you. Please hold your applause. Thank you. Thank you.
You just want me to hit the applause button again, don't you?
Always and everywhere.
There we go.
Thank you. Man, these awards are heavy. Oh my God. Wow, crazy.
It does kind of feel like if Just Another Nerd Show is the MCU, that this show is kind of like the Sony universe for us for talking about this. But when we were going back and forth with a couple of different movies about what to do and what to cover on this episode, and it's like, okay, is it actually Morbin Time? Were you excited that it's Morbin Time, or are you scared to have to revisit this?
I'll defend this movie. I think it has a lot of salvageable parts, and my initial thought was that I think it definitely did not thrive off of being postponed 37 times. Because it was like with every new trailer that came out for it, the marketing got worse and worse because they're like, well, I don't know what else to show. So they tried to show us some new stuff. But it's so hard. Like, you ramp up, you get a release date, and you're like, okay, we're doing it. And it's supposed to take place in a similar timeline to Spider-Man No Way Home, but they kept trucking along with No Way Home and Venom 2, and they just kind of put Morbius on a bit of a shelf a little bit, and then they had to go back and do reshoots and rewrites, and then I think at one point Sony, was it Sony or Marvel that came in and they were like, yeah, you can't use any mention of Spider-Man. You can't use anything at all from this and this. And then what ended up being their post-credit scene was in the trailer, was in one of the early trailers. So I think this movie is a product of its own marketing. And you and I crap on marketing enough on Just Another Nerd Show.
Oh, completely. And I think it is true that I think there needs to be a sort of allowance, a sort of leeway, because you're right. This film was supposed to come out in 2020, and then someone got the sniffles, and then we all stayed home for 2.5 years. But it's got to be hard, and I don't think, aside from Top Gun Maverick, I don't think any movie that was scheduled to come out early or pre-pandemic and then got pushed back to 2022. I think Top Gun Maverick is maybe the only film that came out of that long series of delays unscathed. And this one might have been the one that suffered perhaps the most. Maybe Black Widow, but there is still a marked difference between Black Widow and Morbius. But before we get into, the good and the bad of this film, it is time to take this Sony Spider-Verse Sinister Six film and trailerize it. Imagine what would happen if Bruce Wayne grew up like an emo kid and actually had bat powers. Before you say cool, remember that this rejected episode of What If is worse than you can imagine. Jared Leto stars in the Marvel movie nobody asked for as Michael Morbius, a doctor so smart that he stupidly gives himself a dose of a drug that killed a mouse before bringing it back to life, like he's never seen an episode of The Walking Dead. But this doctor has a conscience, because he only drinks the Kirkland brand version of True Blood. But like all knockoffs, has an expiry date, much like the box office run of this movie. Maybe Matt Smith will show him what a true doctor can do in Morbius. Rated PG-13 for phony goth.
Ooh, that was fun.
It was fun. It was. Okay, let's do the rundown here. This movie stars Jared Leto, Matt Smith, Adria Arjona. Again, I apologize if I mess up any names, but I'm an idiot in a basement with a microphone. Jared Harris, Tyrese Gibson, and a post-credit scene, as mentioned, with the one and only Michael Keaton that actually made it to the theaters. However, it almost starred J.K. Simmons, who had filmed a bunch of scenes as J. Jonah Jameson, but they were eventually cut. And then in an early cut of the film, one of Morbius's quote-unquote prisoners was Carnage. But that was pulled as well, especially when, release dates for different movies were pulled around. It is interesting, though, because we all know that Jared Leto is the worst Joker that ever jokered. But apparently on the short list to play the Joker in Suicide Squad was Matt Smith. I would have loved to have seen Matt Smith as the Joker. That would have been very, very cool. The film was directed by Daniel Espinosa, who is maybe best known for directing the movie Life, which we all just assume is a Venom prequel. But it was almost directed by F. Gary Gray and Antoine Fuqua, who both turned it down. As mentioned, this was supposed to be released in 2020. It wasn't. Spoiler alert. It was released in 2022, which makes it too soon for us to tell if it's going to get nominated for any Razzies. But that being said, the film had a budget of $75 million, according to IMDb. Domestically, it grossed $73 million, and worldwide, only $163 million. When it was released, on the April 1st weekend, April Fool's Day, 2022, according to thenumbers.com. It debuted at number one, making $39 million, beating out The Lost City in its second week, with The Batman in third. But that said, the second week in theaters, it dropped by 74% of its week-over-week gross and was obliterated out of the number one spot by the one and only Sonic 2. But then Twitter took over. They treated this film like it was John Scott getting voted into the NHL All-Star Game.
That's perfect.
I knew you would appreciate that. And I know there's about maybe 20 or 30 other people listening to the show who might actually appreciate it. But yes, John Scott got voted into the All-Star Game because people thought it was funny. And that's not a slag on John Scott. That's just the internet being the internet. But they basically hyped up this film so much and got Morbin Time trending that Sony was like, oh, maybe we should put this in the theater again. People will like it. Wrong. They did re-release it in the theaters based on the quote-unquote praise. They released it into about 1,000 screens. In total, that week, it made less than $300 per screen. This might be the only film in history that bombed twice in the same year. Oh, Sony.
It was so not Morbin Time.
This is definitely not Morbin Time. It's never Morbin Time.
No.
Now, but here's the interesting thing. So over at Metacritic, this film has a Metascore of 35. On Rotten Tomatoes, if you ever want to see the John Scott effect, which I am now coining this as a phrase, this is a real thing now, the John Scott effect. The tomatometer of this is 15%, 1-5. It is literally one of the worst reviewed comic book movies of all time. But the audience score is 71% because apparently the internet has never heard of the word irony. So after going through all of this, is this one of those things where the internet made it better or worse?
I don't. Well, let's see here. I was a part of that movement, by the way, that did the hashtag It's Morbin Time.
Oh, it's your fault. I see.
I am a part of the problem. And my mom always said the best way to get out of a hole is to stop digging. So I'm gonna retire that phrase because this movie should not see the light of day again. But you know what? Anyways, there's a lot of salvageable pieces from it though, and I think there's some, like I was saying before when you were doing the trailerizing. I'm like, man, you can't have a Bat movie without Batman in it, right? So of course Michael Keaton's in it, and of course they gave him maybe another scene or two beyond what we were expecting. Yeah, but I didn't think it was as bad as the what do you call it?
The tomatometer.
Tomatometer. Yeah,
the tomatometer. Yeah, it is funny that you've got Michael Keaton in a movie with bats, and he's not the guy who's the Batman. That would be like Morgan Freeman being in a movie where he's not the narrator, but there is a narrator in the film. And that happened on a previous episode of this podcast as we talked about The Poison Rose. But let's get to the breakdown of Morbius here. We have to start with Michael Morbius himself. So I know you're not the biggest Jared Leto fan, but how was he in this for you?
I actually didn't hate him as Morbius. I really didn't. I thought there were a couple quips that felt a little out of place. But overall, I actually think he did elevate the film at times. I think the We Are Venom line was so weird because I didn't get it. It felt like an inside joke on the set. I'm like, okay, well, that joke, I saw the movie in theaters, I think twice. Don't know why, but I did. And that joke didn't land either time. So, yeah, I think he was strong. I don't think he should be able to handle his own improvisational comedy. But whenever you get an actor of his caliber or Matt Smith's caliber, don't waste them. Like hire some good writers. Don't blow your whole budget on actors. You know, it's just when these movies flop, it's you take a look back at the script and you go, how far off script did we go? And if we didn't, what could we have done to have really helped this along? Because the story itself was, I don't want to say paper thin, but there wasn't much for the actors to go on. I think, and I've said this before on the show, I think these actors did almost the most they can do with what they were given.
I think you could draw a comparison, or at least a parallel with Michael Morbius to Batman, and not just because the fact that, well, he's got bat powers. Look, one of my biggest things about the Batman, or at least the actors that have played Batman, is that, you know, they either are a really good Bruce Wayne or they're a really good Batman, and maybe only Christian Bale was the one that nailed both. I think Michael Keaton was a very good Batman. Not the best Bruce Wayne, but not horrible. I think Val Kilmer was a good Batman, but not a very good Bruce Wayne. I think George Clooney was a very good Bruce Wayne, but not a good Batman. You know, Adam West is gold. We leave him out of the equation here. But I think in this case, this is a tale of two films. And the first half, before it's Morbin Time, Jared Leto is just Michael. You know, genius, prodigy, doctor that is looking to create a cure to cure his own and his best friend's blood disease. And in those scenes, that first half of the film, I actually don't think Jared Leto was bad. I think Michael was, you know, considerate and humble, and you know, the scene where he's helping that little girl who's in his care kind of thing, which means he's carrying on the altruism of a meal. That aspect of Michael Morbius was good. The minute it became Morbin Time, it felt like it got a little too campy and a little too comic booky. You know, the whole, like, you wouldn't like me when I'm hungry. You know, funny, clever, if you know where the line comes from. It's just, I didn't necessarily like Jared Leto as Morbius the living vampire. I liked him as Michael, the guy who was trying to find the cure. And because there's a tonal difference between the two. But let's move on to that best friend, Matt Smith. Look, over on Just Another Nerd Show, we have been singing the praises of Matt Smith basically till the cows come home, because of his work on House of the Dragon. And when it was announced that he was going to be in this, it's like, oh, thank God, finally, Matt Smith joins the Marvel, not necessarily the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but at least the potential of joining the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And I feel so bad because it feels like a waste of a perfectly good Matt Smith. So what were your thoughts, though, on Matt Smith as Milo/Lucius?
I think he was amazing. I think, honestly, he had a lot of fun with this character. It definitely jumped off the screen, but he was also able to handle a bit more of the serious times of it. His character came across as arrogant, smuggy, was always kind of a step ahead, and the moment that Dr. Michael Morbius was able to kind of hone in on his true power, and Matt Smith was on his heels, or not Matt Smith, but Milo was on his heels, that's when he kind of got a taste of his own medicine. But for the entirety of, I'm going to talk about just the second half, because the first half, I actually think they developed a pretty good friendship. There was a good backstory there. These two young boys that grew up from basically nothing had each other's backs. I think that was a nice, touching little story. I think that them as vampires or living vampires, it was interesting. That's always my nice way. You can always tell if you listen to Just Another Nerd Show, when I use the word interesting, it means I'm holding back from really crapping on something, or I'm trying to find the good in something. But his performance wasn't bad. I think that is what they were going for, though, in that Milo character, is that once he was given power, because these two characters are two leads, haven't had proper function in their legs for the better part of their life, if the whole thing. So as soon as it's the effect of, have you ever heard of the twin theory, Wiss?
Vaguely, but go on, continue.
So the twin theory is you have two children. Let's say they're both boys for argument's sake, because we're talking about two boys here. You have the twin theory. You have two boys, and they have the exact same upbringing. And let's say, for example, their father drank a lot. You'll have one twin that says, my father drank a lot, and that's why I'm never going to touch a bottle in my life. And then you have the other one that says, my father drank a lot, and that's why I drink a lot. So you have the exact same upbringing, but there's always two sides to a coin. So with this case, you have a very similar upbringing, very similar condition with the two of them, but you have the twin theory where Matt Smith starts to get a little arrogant and Morbius starts to ask questions and try to investigate, and understands pretty early on in the process that he actually needs to close himself off from society because it's for the greater good. So as much of an anti-hero as he might be, he was definitely more on the hero side in this movie, which of course he has to be for us to try to root for him. Mm-hmm. But yeah, and then Matt Smith took it a bit more as, I can take what I want now that I have not just my legs back, but I'm way stronger than everyone else.
I think it was also important for them to see, while Michael was getting this, stellar education and helping cultivate that generational brain of his, or whatever they wanted to acknowledge it as. Meanwhile, Milo's getting his ass kicked, because he dropped his letter out the window and he tried to get it. And you see like the anger that's in there. And if you're someone who's basically had to fight for everything in their life, then yeah, you're going to have a massive chip on your shoulder here. The thing is, with this character, with Milo, Matt Smith, I think, did the absolute best with what was on the sheet. And I recognize that the character is kind of based on the character of Hunger out of the comic books, but it falls into a little bit of the same, that comic book trope, in that the hero finds themselves fighting a villain with a very similar power or skill set. You saw it with the first Iron Man film. It was Iron Man versus the Ironmonger. Even in the second Iron Man film, where he had to go up against Whiplash, and his weapons are powered by the arc reactor. Thor going
Black
up against
Panther, Winter Soldier.
Absolutely, right? Like, it's that thing of a hero having to fight someone with a similar power and skill set, and this is literally like two vapor clouds chasing each other across New York. But that said, at least you see the hunger in Milo, and in Morbius, you see someone who is, knows what he needs to do in order to not, become weak and revert and probably die. It's a reluctant thing. It just happens to be the guy who also created this, for lack of a better term, True Blood. Let's call it like it is. It's the blueberry version of True Blood. But the next thing about Matt Smith is that in playing Doctor Who and coming onto the role of Doctor Who after David Tennant, both of those actors were able to be fun and quirky. But when the Doctor turns on you, if you run afoul of the Doctor, it's not going to end up well for you. Both David Tennant and Matt Smith knew that, saw that, and were able to portray that. Especially in, I think it was the 6th season of, or at least of that run, Matt Smith's 2nd season as the Doctor. You saw those shifts. You saw the fun, quirky Doctor until it's time to get real serious.
Did anyone take the under on how long it would take for Wiz to bring up Doctor Who?
I
sure did.
If you, I think the over under was about 10 minutes. So if you took the over, congratulations. Well, no, I did mention in the trailer eyes too, though. So maybe it's the under.
Yeah,
maybe it's the under. I don't know. We'll have to see when we're fully edited here what time it came in, so you can do your guess here. But it's true though. I mean, this is the 4th Doctor to appear in a comic book movie recently. Of course, we had Christopher Eccleston, who was in Thor: The Dark World. We're sorry. David Tennant, who, of course, was brilliant in Jessica Jones. Matt Smith now in here. And Peter Capaldi as the Thinker in The Suicide Squad. I mean, let's be honest. David Tennant definitely got the best role out of those 4. But I don't think Milo is the worst character out of this 4. In fact, I would say that Matt Smith's portrayal of Milo may be the second best of those 4 roles.
Ooh. Yeah, okay.
Now you're thinking about it.
Well, I mean, it's definitely a discussion.
Mm-hmm. Malekith is not a strong contender for villain of the year in the MCU. In fact, Malekith might even be the worst villain of the entire MCU.
I think I would take Sex Doll Doctor Doom from 2015's Fantastic Four over Malekith.
Okay, but I'm talking MCU here. And Malekith was proper MCU.
I'm talking worst comic book movie villains. In recent history. We've had some pretty bad ones.
Oh, we have. We absolutely have. But I think in MCU history, Malekith could be considered the worst. Peter Capaldi is the Thinker, who actually wasn't bad in the Suicide Squad, but I think, his character was more for jokes. Yeah.
He wasn't a villain, though.
Yeah, it was more for jokes, though. Let's be honest.
Well, he was used by the government for Project Starfish. He wasn't the main villain. So they found out throughout that story that the Suicide Squad weren't the only villains that were contracted to do dirty work for the government. And that was, it's honestly, it's a great through thread of that story.
Damn it, Waller.
Yeah. It's just, they're just renting them out. They're like, hey, look, you're in here for life. How would you like to use that brain of yours? That's really it.
And I know Matt Smith took on this role because he actually called up Karen Gillan. I guess Karen Gillan was like, oh yeah, no, do it. It's a lot of fun. Oh, Amy Pond. What have you done? But Matt Smith really did bring a lot to this role and made it. But can you imagine anyone else in that role? I don't think the film would have been near as good as it could have been.
Yeah,
it's hard to say because Matt Smith he made you, feel a little bit from Milo, especially, before he went full on, I'm going to eat everybody. You felt for him. You understood where he was coming from. You understood why he was like, no, I'm not going to be denied this gift. I'm not going to be denied this power because I have earned it. I'm not going to suffer anymore. Although, is it me? Was it ever really revealed how he got so damn rich?
I don't know. Was it like inheritance or something?
It's hard to say.
Remember.
Hard to say. Okay, let's move on to Adria Arjona as Martine Bancroft.
10 out of 10. Great performance.
Yeah.
Really?
I mean, she's not bad in it. I just think the character is poorly written.
Yes, there you go. She executed her script to the best of her abilities.
Yeah, but that script was not very good. I mean, she starts off again, I think this is a tale of two movies. The first half, she is a very competent assistant to Michael Morbius in trying to help him find a cure because she knows it will cure him, but she knows it will cure many others. Like there's an altruism in that. But then her character devolves into damsel in distress, and it's just so it takes away from what Adria has brought to the role.
Yeah, you know what? I liked. I think if I could just give a quick little shout out here, because she was in that scene that I'm about to reference. That boat sequence, that entire boat sequence, is every mad scientist's dream, where somebody gives you a way to do your experiments, where Dr. Michael Morbius is on a ticking time bomb. He is a ticking time bomb. He's like, I don't know if I got days, if I got weeks, if I got months. I guarantee I don't have a year. So he is just doing the mad scientist thing. And somebody enables him, not only financially, but gives him an out where they go, well, on international waters, you don't have to listen to any laws. So then you find that way. And Adria did a remarkable job in this scene alone, only because her character was left in the dark and then just saw all these bodies and actually did a pretty good job of kind of conveying the tone that would be set for the next little bit. When it came to like media talking about Morbius or anything like that, because for a majority of the movie, they thought there was this killer out there and Morbius was kind of able to live two lives until Tyrese Gibson and Al Madrigal, playing those agents, shows up to his front door.
Yeah, and then of course, like there's the reveal at the very end of the film. By the way, spoilers. So she is basically kidnapped by Milo, and then she gets bitten, I guess. And then like at the end of the film, after Morbius has defeated Milo, like she opens her eyes, like all of a sudden, like, oh, boop, okay, all of a sudden I now have the same thing. I'm now a vampire. You're taking a lot on faith that you're going to get a Morbius too. But B, I think it would have been more interesting if rather than do the whole eye-opening dun 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 kind of moment, if it ended with Michael's quest, to find a cure for not just his own disease, but for her as well. Like here's a reason for him to go back to being the scientist rather than, it's reverse engineering at that point. He has to find the cure for the cure. Maybe it's just me. Again, it does. Like, I know the first Suicide Squad film had a lot of studio input into it, and it went through like 2 or 3 different cuts. And we know this film did too. I just wonder if her character is more fleshed out in the original cut.
And that's what it comes down to. And we could say that about each of these characters is, how much, and the sanctity of the original cut, what happened. Because we know in that intro that we kind of talked about at the beginning of the show, there were a lot of changes and a lot of meddling. And we know this as video editors. You and I are in the industry, right? We might be in a different field, but we're still in the industry. We know that an editor will take a director's cut, will make it somewhat happen with little supervision from the producers. They take that cut or cuts of different scenes, and they get feedback from exec producers, and then they get feedback from studio heads, and usually there's a load of feedback coming back. So by the end of it, like obviously we talked about how like Sony went in after and they meddled with a bunch of stuff. They had to fix the timeline a little bit. So they had to do a little bit of reshoots on Michael Keaton's part to kind of retcon No Way Home a little bit. Was it for the better? Who knows? Will there ever be a director's cut? Probably not.
Hashtag release the Espinosa cut.
Oh God, no! Please don't. No.
Hey,
no.
If we can get John Scott into the NHL All-Star game and we can get Morbius back into theaters, we can release the Espinosa cut. Gonna happen. We talked about how Martine's character might have been a bit more fleshed out in an earlier version. One person who definitely needed to be more fleshed out was Jared Harris, playing Emil Nichols. This is the guy who was the doctor who's basically looking after the kids and, basically running what you have to think is this private clinic in Greece for people with this disease. And then still looking after them into adulthood. His character is really interesting because here's the guy who really pushed for Michael to get a higher education and to really tap into the brain power that he has and the intelligence and, get him to to quote Martine, the Nobel Prize. It's the Nobel Prize. I wonder if they said Nobel Prize because they couldn't legally say Nobel. I wonder if that's the case. I could be wrong. Regardless of, Emil needed to be fleshed out because unfortunately, and again, spoilers here, when Milo kills him, it has less impact. Here's the guy who helped them from childhood, protected them, kept them, for lack of a better term, alive, and yet we don't see that impact on Milo's life. So when the moment comes, it's a glossing over.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with that. I don't have anything really to add. He was a wasted actor. Just a wasted actor. Mm-hmm. Like they could have put Danny DeVito into that role and it wouldn't have mattered.
Are we doing the Danny DeVito role again here?
I'm just going to pitch Danny DeVito as every character.
Well, no, there's a Danny DeVito rule, right?
What's the Danny DeVito rule?
Okay, so take a movie like 50 Shades of Grey.
Yeah.
All right. Christian Grey is not a good man, but he's so handsome and rich. Recast him as Danny DeVito, and do you feel the same way about that character as you do as it's played otherwise?
Wow. Oh, I actually got like kind of a shiver down my spine. That's okay. Yeah, I don't want to think about that.
Exactly.
Oh my God.
And again, that's nothing against Danny DeVito, but it's true, right? You have these characters that do bad things, but they're so handsome or they're so pretty kind of thing. Nope. Danny DeVito, and all of a sudden it's a maniacal monster. That's pretty much what it boils down to. The thing with
what's the point of that then? I want to go deeper down that. The Danny DeVito thing. So that's to try and flush out bad writing?
Not necessarily flush out bad writing, but to flush out really how you should feel about a character in the way that they are portrayed and the things that they do, right?
Yeah.
Christian Grey, for everything that he does to Dakota Johnson's character, you really shouldn't be sitting there going, oh yeah, no, well, you know what, he's rich and he flies her around in the jet. If it's, or even Gilbert Gottfried. If it's Gilbert Gottfried going, get into my red room, I'm going to whip you a little bit. You're not going to be sitting there and wondering if this is a really sexy movie. I can't believe
what I was actually thinking? One of my first thoughts while we're doing all this, I'm thinking, man, like what character would I recast Danny DeVito as, like in Game of Thrones? And I was like, man, all those characters were really well written and they all had really either selfish ambition or good intentions. Like you actually could cast him in Game of Thrones as almost anyone. Mm-hmm. And I feel like people would still feel for that character. I think what you're saying is 100% right, though, is that there's a lot of characters out there where they hide, and I don't know how we're getting onto this tangent because of Jared Harris, but anyways, where they can hide bad writing or hide a weak-willed or character that has bad integrity behind an actor that is either very well known or behind an actor that's good looking. Like,
you exactly. You are justifying bad actions by characters through wealth and attractiveness. And if you put someone in there that's not those, then it exposes the true character of the person. Like, again, using House of the Dragon as an example here. If Otto Hightower is played by Rhys Ifans. He's stoic. He's regal. We know that he's, doing chess moves in order to, secure, political favor for his family. If that's Danny DeVito in there going, "Hey, daughter, why don't you put the nice dress on? Go cozy up to the king." Right? All of a sudden you're like, Otto Hightower's a bad guy. And that's nothing against Danny DeVito, who I think actually was a very good choice to play the Penguin way back in Batman Returns. But it does point out those characters. Like, if you put Danny DeVito in Milo's role, it's straight villain. It's straight villain. Matt Smith makes it almost a sympathetic villain.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's a good take. I agree with that. So I introduced the twin theory, and you have the Danny DeVito theory?
Yes.
We got to bring that over to Just Another Nerd Show and let the fans decide which theory makes more sense.
Okay,
I like
but
that.
The day we get to a Fancast Friday and Danny DeVito is one of our choices, we have to question if the person that we're casting is a good person or not. But let's move on.
I like that.
Yeah, exactly. That's basically the type I'd say, nope, this character's evil. You mentioned earlier the FBI agents, Tyrese Gibson and Al Madrigal. It's basically good cop, bad cop in this case. And it's interesting because to have someone, especially like Tyrese Gibson, it felt like they were trying to set up Tyrese Gibson to maybe be the FBI agent that has to deal with the eventuality of a Sinister Six somewhere down the road.
I know you want me to give my 2 cents on this. Let's be honest, and I'll just throw this right out there. Tyrese Gibson was wasted, and you could have casted, and this sounds awful, and I apologize to the screenwriter for saying it, you could have casted Joe Schmo off the street into these roles, and they would have done the same job. You're right. It felt like a statement casting Tyrese Gibson. It felt like he was meant for bigger things, but they cut so much of him. Like, wasn't there a shot in the trailer of him with like a mechanical arm? Like, they completely took that out of the movie.
Yeah, there's so much that changed in this film. And yeah, I mean, you also mentioned too the whole like, "I am Venom" line, which it was okay for a laugh and all that. There was a point where like the two cops are sitting there saying like, "Oh, we haven't seen something like this since, that business out in San Francisco." And we all know what that meant. And if that had been the only throwaway reference to Venom, I think it would have been subtle enough and not enough to be able to say, okay, this is all the same universe. And yeah, if you put someone like Tyrese Gibson in that role, and the amount of screen presence they gave him almost showed the hand, like, yeah, get used to this guy. You could see somewhere down the road, with Kraven the Hunter, and maybe with Madam Web, that we get more and more Tyrese Gibson, that he's maybe the guy who ends up, basically running some FBI task force on the Sinister Six. I just don't know if we're going to get there now.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, you keep in mind, if you're doing a team-up movie, so for example, the most successful team-up movie in the last 10 years, okay, The Avengers. Were all of the movies leading up to it stellar, or were they necessary? Like, Iron Man 1 was a slam dunk, like, home run, out of the park, great movie. The Incredible Hulk, they had to recast Ed Norton, but they still used The Incredible Hulk as canon. Not a excellent movie, but it wasn't bad.
I actually didn't mind. I mean, keep in mind, too, I was weighing the Incredible Hulk, versus the Ang Lee Hulk movie, and that might be the worst comic book movie out there.
Yeah, and at the time, Thor wasn't even seen as a bad movie either, but it wasn't super well received. And then at the time as well, Captain America: The First Avenger wasn't even seen as that great of a movie. Now, things have been recontextualized later on that have made that movie a little bit better, and there's a lot of people that would argue that he has the best trilogy of any Marvel character. I think they included Tobey Maguire in that, which that means that's fighting words. But
you know
anyways,
what? I think you'd be right. I think Captain America does have the best trilogy of films.
Yeah, but back to my initial point though, and yes, that's a good conversation for another time. But we've had an introduction to Michael Keaton's Vulture, Adrian Toomes. It wasn't his own movie. We've had an introduction to Venom, and we've had a sequel to Venom. We've had an introduction to Michael Morbius. Now, I think a Sinister Six is still doable, very much so, and doing their own movie too. The movie that is the precursor to it does not need to be stellar, but it needs to have initialized and set in place the history of that character. Like what the Avengers was able to do was introduce some of the more grounded heroes, like Hawkeye, Black Widow was introduced in Iron Man 2, and even Hawkeye was kind of teased in Thor.
Yeah.
Like, they kind of had their bases covered for the most part. I think you need to have some of these solo movies because they're necessary. If you're going to do a Sinister Six and you just had Morbius show up, you kind of needed that backstory. So as much as this is a subpar movie, yeah, you needed it.
But before we continue, I think this conversation needs to be had, because the thing with all comic book movies these days is how it fits in the grander scheme of things. Now, look, the end goal of these Sony Spider-Verse films feels like they're really still pushing forward to try to get that Sinister Six film. I mean, they were trying to tease that at the end of the Amazing Spider-Man 2, the Andrew Garfield one. So, knowing this, and knowing the reception to Suicide Squad, even the Suicide Squad, because I personally think, as much as I love James Gunn, I think the Suicide Squad isn't as good as other people make it out to be. It's just looked at really well because the first Suicide Squad sucked. And knowing that Marvel is bringing the Thunderbolts to the MCU, is the Sinister Six necessary? Or can we not just have individual films?
I actually think it would be an interesting concept if Sony were to get their ish together, introduce the Sinister Six, and have them be like the villains of the Thunderbolts team. Because if you're going to have a team of anti-heroes and maybe heroes that have chips on their shoulder that they need to prove themselves, and you want to show them as the heroes, have them beating the crap out of some like clearly not so great dudes, right?
I mean, this of course leads to maybe the biggest what the moment for this film is the Vulture conundrum at the end.
Yeah.
Right? Like, we know that this film went through reshoots, and there were some scenes in the initial trailers that definitely did not make the final cut. Like even scenes with, wanted Spider-Man posters on the wall kind of thing, which alluded to what we saw at the end of Far From Home. And then all of a sudden out pops the Vulture in his full Vulture armor, which we don't know which universe it is, but if it's Venom's universe, we know that that's a different universe than the MCU. Well, where did he get the Chitauri-based equipment for his flight suit? And then he's sitting there going, how did I get here? I think it has something to do with Spider-Man. Yeah. We haven't seen a Spider-Man in the Sony Spider-Verse. The only time it's been referenced... He came from
the MCU.
No, but the only time...
They established that.
Yes, but Vulture would know who Spider-Man is, possibly, depending on that spell that Doctor Strange made. Mm-hmm. And with Venom, at the end of No Way Home, he's at the bar and he's getting this. So let me get this straight. There's all these heroes. And, so basically in his world, the Avengers don't exist. There's not all these heroes. And then he gets, phased back into his own universe. I think part of the problem is that you can't have Vulture say, I think it has to do with Spider-Man, because we don't know if Spider-Man exists or which Spider-Man exists in that universe, because we haven't seen it. I don't think it's going to be Tobey Maguire, and I don't think it's going to be Tom Holland. Yeah, I think at best you're going to have Andrew Garfield as the Spider-Man in that universe, but it just seems very weird because it feels like Morbius shouldn't know who Spider-Man is.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, no, Morbius doesn't have. He doesn't say it, right? He doesn't. He kind of gives him a look. It's Michael Keaton delivers that line, and then Morbius just kind of gives him a look. I don't think Morbius actually confirms with him or affirms with him.
He just says it sounds interesting, and then cut to credits. Right? And it just feels so shoehorned in. Like, oh, we have to make this, connect
it was very
to,
campy.
Yeah, exactly. Right? Like, I would have been fine if they had just let the post-credit scene be Martine opening her eyes on the rooftop, which leads us to question Morbius's next moves in the next movie. If there is going to be a next movie, we don't need to. And I know this kind of goes in contrary to what we say over on Just Another Nerd Show, because every time a new show pops up, we sit there and say, well, who, is this person going to show up? And is this person going to show up? And is this person going to show up? And we often feel disappointed when all these characters that we fantasize about appearing in this series don't show up. Here, I'm kind of wishing that Vulture didn't show up, because it would have at least alluded to the idea that the Sinister Six could exist without a force to stop them.
Yeah.
Or at least a world that they could be the heroes.
Well, okay, so considering that, they didn't want any references to the current Spider-Man universe in the Marvel 616. Yet they shipped Michael Keaton off to this universe, wherever it is. They haven't designated the Sony Spider-Verse yet. They haven't designated that multiverse, that universe. Mm-hmm. What would have been a better option than Adrian Toomes? Like, they'd already done the Venom thing in No Way Home of kind of showing him in a place looking at the TV, looking at a news story. So I feel like we can take that out entirely. But what would have been the connective tissue at the end of this movie that would have made you left somewhat satisfied?
I think...
I'm putting you on the spot here because I know I didn't ask you this beforehand.
I think the best villain that you could have transported to that universe that could have made sense would be would have been the No Way Home version of Electro. Because it was clearly different enough from the Andrew Garfield one that you have to sit there and say, well, maybe it's a different multiversal Electro. Exactly, right?
They retconned it in No Way Home. Mm-hmm. That he is Andrew Garfield's. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you had sent one of those, either him or maybe the Lizard, Resiphons again. One of those two to the Morbius world, then that would have firmly planted which Spider-Man we were going to be dealing with.
Yeah.
But instead they put the Vulture there. So it feels like it should be fish out of water because Tom Holland is not of that universe. Mm-hmm. And it seems even weirder because he wasn't in No Way Home. Why did he get transported to this universe?
I think it would have been really, really cool, in my humble opinion. I think it would have been really cool since we know that Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, the main villain, or at least one of the main antagonists, is supposed to be the Spot. I think it would have been cool if we had seen a live action Spot, because it would have led to a lot of theories. Not like I didn't need it on screen or anything. Maybe it was like a newspaper or something that blew by and said the Spot strikes again, and it was just something subtle like that. No. Michael Morbius doesn't even see it. Whatever. It's more for us to theorize as to what universe Morbius and Venom are in, because that would have led to a bigger discussion for their Sony universe, because they do have very successful animated movies and they have a Spider verse Madam Web type thing that could cross over multiple pieces of IP. I think that would have been a big mic drop moment, and definitely would have kept the conversation going beyond it's Morbin time, let's re-release this piece of like. Yeah.
John Scott is the villain of the Morbius universe. That is all I'm going to say. The other thing I need to bring up here is the graphics in this one, because of course, people would make fun of the vapor trails left behind by everybody here. I think there was some good and some bad, but what were your thoughts on the visualization of the, for lack of a better term, vampire sense?
I think when you have a darker movie like this, it's easier. I'm not going to say it's easy, because motion graphics artists, like, it's incredibly hard what they do. And to find the right lighting and shading and all that, even the ones that say, oh, well, like, I'm good at my job, whatever, they still put a tremendous amount of work in. So not to knock anything that they do, But in a movie like this, where a lot of your CG, like I'm thinking about like the boat scene where it's a little darker. One of the last scenes where they're in that dark sewer. There's another scene where they're in the underground train, or what's it called? The subway. They're in the subway line, and there's kind of some darker, kind of smoky moments. It's a lot easier to hide unfinished or unrendered or bad CG in dark environments because you don't have to worry about shading. So this movie was able to hide it a bit better. Having said that, there were a couple times where you notice some things, and I think it's just because our eyes are maybe tuned to it right now, because we've gotten so much as comic book fans that now, like for example, that first trailer comes out of She-Hulk, and everyone's talking about, oh, it looks unrendered, it looks unfinished, oh, she looks like oh, and clearly they fixed it for the show, but our eyes are just trained for it now. So, this movie, what was your original question?
About the graphics, because there's a couple things.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, when Milo and Morbius are fighting each other, it seems like a very, we get back to the whole, end fight scene, like from Venom, where it's just big gobs of glue that are smashed together, like, someone spilling all the, all the putty all over the place. But
yeah,
in this one, while I wasn't necessarily a big fan of the vapor trails, the design behind the sonar aspect of his abilities.
That was cool. That was really cool.
Yeah, like that. There was that scene where Martine is on the rooftop as bait to lure him out, and you see the heartbeat in the sonar waves kind of thing. And this was really, really well done.
Yeah.
It was visually stunning.
They could have used it as like a Daredevil tactic too, right? Like you remember Daredevil, the Netflix show, how he could tell when people were lying, and that's what would make him kind of dive deeper and try to get the truth. I feel like they didn't really go into that too much in this.
No, they went to the budget version, which I think was it was the perfect way to do it for the Netflix series, and what they were trying to do with that feel, the Hell's Kitchen verse, if you will. It's definitely a world better than what happened in the Ben Affleck film. But I have to say, like if there's one thing that's carried over from this film into the MCU, I would love to see that visualization of the sonar ability adapted to Daredevil in the Born Again series. I think that those artists, those CGI artists, those graphic artists should be brought over to that series, because that was really well done. Like I'll give them full credit for that.
I think there should have been, now that I'm thinking about this, I think the one thing that maybe might have turned around this movie is that if they had killed off Martine Bancroft, and if they had gone with the idea that, yes, Michael Morbius is so smart that he made synthetic blood, and yes, that's going to tame the monster that is within him, but he's not going to be as strong as Milo because Milo feeds off of fresh blood, and then Morbius would have had to have kind of came to this realization when Milo went on a bit of a tear, and they kind of went this way, but not really, not even really that close, is that I think they should have done it where Michael Morbius needed to kill Martine Bancroft to take her blood, drain her completely in order to defeat Milo. And it was one of those like heroic sacrifices kind of, but it would get spun in like a post-credit scene where he's the villain because he's always an anti-hero, right? He's always doing the right thing for the wrong reasons or wrong thing for the right reasons. Yeah,
it's like if you go to Titans, it's like Connor Kent using the shields given to him by Lex Luthor in the Young Justice animated series. Like he knows he shouldn't be doing this, but he does it because he has to, because he needs to save the day. Here, yes, you're right, absolutely. If Morbius did drink Martine's blood and basically killed her in order to defeat Milo, so no one else had to die, but then he's wanted for the murder of Martine, that's definitely a much more interesting storyline.
Yeah,
at least going forward, because there's a reason why you bring someone like a Tyrese Gibson in, because then it becomes a manhunt, if you will, and you have something more to do with Morbius too. And then Morbius 2 is no longer, hero fights the villain with the same power set. Then it becomes more like, the Fugitive movie with Harrison Ford, where he's on the run from the law, even though he's really not the bad guy.
Or similar to Venom as well, right? Because they already did the anti-hero thing, right? Maybe that's what they were worried about, so to speak. They're worried about the similarities, right? That's why they, in the latest Thor movie, they changed up Gore's look because they didn't want Gore to get compared to Voldemort.
Yeah, absolutely. Plus, Gore goes down as the worst babysitter in history. Just going to say that.
Oh, as soon as they got the kids involved, I face palmed. I'm like, this is going to be the worst movie ever.
But no, that's not the worst movie ever because we're talking about Morbius. But before we get to our MVPs,
yeah,
I had to go that way. Before we get to our MVPs, Twitter has spoken on this one. Our good friend Greg over at Movie Date Night, who you'll remember from the episode we did of the Grading on a Curve, chimed in with, "I will give credit to Morbius's scientific research in testing his limits in the beginning, but aside from that, this movie was a massive slog to get through. This was more boring than Elektra and more nonsense than Jonah Hex. I weep for the future of the Sinister Six." So, first of all, Greg, thank you so much for that one. I'm going to put it to you, though. Like, in comparing this to movies like Elektra and Jonah Hex, or movies that we talked about, in the Grading on a Curve episode where we talked about superhero movies, how would Morbius have fared against those other 5 movies? For those who have not listened to this episode, we took 5 superhero movies: Elektra, Jonah Hex, Superman 4: The Quest for Peace, Catwoman, and Green Lantern, and rated them amongst themselves, or at least ranked them amongst themselves. Morbius was not one of those films. I wonder, I'm going to put this to you, is Morbius worse than those 5 films?
No, I'm trying to remember my list. I had Catwoman at number 1 as the worst.
Yeah.
And I stand by that. I think
so did I. Yeah.
Catwoman is not even close. It's not on this level. Because this, at least with Catwoman, you're watching it, and when you finish it, you're like, what's that thing on TikTok where Dwayne Johnson goes, "This is the biggest piece of bullshit." Like, yeah. So there was nothing salvageable from it. At least with this Morbius movie, there were some salvageable pieces. There were some actors that people like. I don't think Halle Berry was enough to save that movie.
No. I do think Morbius, like, if you had to put Morbius in those, make it a out of 6, I think I'd put Morbius maybe 3rd. And I know for my top 2, I had Jonah Hex and Green Lantern. I think Morbius was definitely better than Superman 4: The Quest for Peace. I think it was better than Elektra. Definitely better than Catwoman. Although I will say Catwoman, if you had put Catwoman's cinematography into Morbius, oh my God, that would have been that would have added to everything that they already put in, but it might have been too much. Hard to say. Morbius is not the worst superhero film of all time by any stretch of the imagination. Because I'm looking at the 1990 Captain America film that was done by Canon Films, and that sucked ass. This, you're right.
Man, you hate Canon Films. Every time we talk about it, you're like, "Yo, Canon Films. You hate them.
Not true, because I actually did like Masters of the Universe.
No, you didn't. Nobody did.
Go back and listen to the Masters of the Universe episode.
Oh my God.
Carrie even said that she enjoyed it more than Star Wars, of which I almost divorced her at that point. But that being said,
I do remember that. Remember that. Yeah.
Yeah. She broke the internet. Also, Johnny Rothen has chimed in with, "Reminded me of the good old B movies. Certainly has its faults, but a breath of fresh air to get a low-key superhero movie functioning on its own without relying much on other characters or stories from the Sony Marvel universe." And I do have to agree to a point that bringing Morbius onto the screen, I know Artisan Entertainment originally had the rights to do a Morbius film. Artisan is the company that eventually gave us, I think it was I can't remember which one it was. It might have actually been Jonah Hex. I know they also were involved in the Man-Thing movie starring Rachel Hunter before she joined Jessica Jones. Morbius is at least a character that we really haven't seen maybe beyond the 1990s Fox Spider-Man cartoon. Was it refreshing to you to have a new comic book character brought to life?
I'm actually going to disagree with that tweet. I think this movie actually could have used a bit more of a crossover. Because I think in the recency, at least, crossovers tend to be kind of the glitter on top of a really poorly written script. And that's obviously, like, for anyone who's also watching the She-Hulk show right now, that's what we're getting. Is we're getting basically cameos every week. Where she literally makes the joke in that show, and I apologize. I know we're here to talk about Morbius. I just have one point to make about this stupid show, is that when Wong showed up and Tatiana Maslany as Jennifer Walters looks right into camera and she goes, "I guess we have like Twitter armor for the week," and I'm like, my God, why are you so self-aware that this show sucks? But yes, we're not going to on Wong because we love him and we love your cousin Bruce and we love But that's literally what the show is. So I think this movie could have capitalized on a bit more of a crossover to make fans think. That's the thing that we got to get back to. I'm going to get on my soapbox here, man. Give me a sec. Is we got to get back to setting up things. I know, like, Kevin Feige in the bigger MCU, Sony doesn't really do it that much. They did it a bit with Venom Let There Be Carnage. Can we please get back to setting up a bigger thing? And giving us teases for bigger concepts, not just your next great venture, not just your next your next little side project or whatever. Like, I need big level villains. I didn't need Adrian Toomes showing up and name dropping Spider-Man. It made no sense. I would have loved to have had like an article written by Eddie Brock. So then at least we can get full confirmation that they're in the same universe. You know, like something there. I didn't need to be more confused. I needed a couple answers. I needed a bit more of a crossover, and they took that away from us. There was footage of it, and they took that away from us.
One of the other points he brings up is that it reminded him of the good old B movies. And I know Marvel, I recognize this is a Sony film, but I know Marvel makes a point of trying to, fit their movies and the different series into kind of their own genres. And we had that Werewolf by Night trailer drop at D23 recently, and how it's got this, black and white monster film, grindhouse kind of feel. Could Morbius have benefited from a bit more genreification of the filming style?
I think Morbius actually would have thrived under like a Zack Snyder almost. I feel like Zack Snyder would have freaking killed it doing a Morbius movie. Because his darkness and that grit, I feel like, yep, now I'm seeing it. Yeah.
I think if Zack Snyder filmed it similar to how 300 was done, yes, absolutely.
That's exactly what I was thinking. Yes.
Oh, yeah, no. I don't think Justice Leaguing it would have worked, but I think 300 would have. And finally, Louis ASAP614, whose name on here is literally Morbius's blood bag. Thank you for chiming in on this one, by the way. 3 tweets here. I enjoyed the movie. It was exciting to me. No boring parts. I liked the action just when the horror element could have been played up with more with an R rating. Some scenes needed to be cut down and some longer. Like the train scene, didn't like Matt running in slow-mo, should have been shorter. And I think more of Jared getting used to his powers would have been better. Would have liked to see more of Matt's fight at the club. I'm glad to see it's doing well on Netflix and hope a part 2 comes to fruition. Would love to see Adria as a villain and Michael Keaton. So there's a couple points here. And I want to get to one of the first ones here. It's true. This is a PG-13 film about bloodlusting vampires. Would an R rating have helped this?
No, there's a lot of stuff that goes on like behind the scenes. Like they had the Venom movie initially as an R rating, And then they had to pull it back because I think there was the prospect of potentially crossing over with Tom Holland. So if you're going to eventually move into like a Sinister Six, if ever Sony was to open up the IP to sell all their Marvel properties right back, which I'm sure the price tag's big now, they would need to have an established universe that Marvel could take over. And I think the PG-13 rating keeps the door open. Even though Marvel has stated that they're going to keep Deadpool R-rated, so it's interesting. But I think at the end of the day, the PG-13 rating, like I was getting to, it keeps the door open for more crossover stuff. But it seems like they're just doing it with their own IP, so why not just make it all R-rated?
And you have to think from a fiscal standpoint too. Let's call this what it is, right? This film was released, coming out of the Omicron variant of the pandemic. So you have to be a little bit more understanding as to the lower box office take on it, because there were some places where it was still really problematic and a lot of hurdles to get through to even go into a movie theater, and watching a film with a mask on was never fun to begin with. But PG-13 at least opened that door. But one of the other points that really stood out for me on this one was, more of Jared getting used to his powers.
I agree with that statement, actually.
Yeah, like we kind of poke fun a little bit sometimes about the training montage. You gotta need a montage. But, it seemed very glossed over. There were points where he, like the whole testing his sonar thing with bouncing the ball around kind of thing, and then all of a sudden I can fly. You don't necessarily learn these things right away. You have to. That's why I loved in the first Iron Man film, I wanted to see Tony crash and burn as he was, testing out how to fly. It worked. It made sense. This seemed like inherently immediate, him learning how to be able to use these powers. He jumped in front of a moving subway train. He shouldn't know that he can do that.
The great thing about the Iron Man movie, and I'm glad you brought that up, is because he never actually mastered anything. He tried compressing his suit, making it smaller, but all the new toys that he added, he didn't fully test out. So by the end, when he had to use some, second-rate arc reactor to try and power his suit, it wasn't compatible. So actually, he was at the huge disadvantage, and he needed help in the end, and he needed to kind of help deal with his problem. He wasn't even the one who really ended it, because Stain was clearly winning the fight. And in this one, it was like Milo was leaning into his power set a bit more, whereas Michael Morbius was kind of always trying to figure out a way to suppress that. And I get it. As a scientist, I understand where he's coming from. But if you're not leaning into the power and you're not truly figuring out, like, yes, he had a montage where he was trying to figure out what his whole power set was, and he had the bat radar and the sonar, and he could kind of fly or whatever it was. Like, he kind of figured out what he could do, but Milo was extorting what he could do. He was testing the limits, and Morbius was just testing what he could do. So there was a bit of a difference in power set. So again, back to my theory, I think he should have drank some real blood in order to, juice up a little bit before that final fight. But whatever, what do I know?
Okay, before we get to our MVP here, I'm going to, tackle one more point here that was brought up. Do we see Morbius 2?
No. Oh, sorry, was that too fast?
No, please do explain. Why do you think we don't see a Morbius 2?
Because they re-released it and it bombed twice. That's the whole point. If the fans pulled a fast one on them, I don't think it's a business, and at the end of the day, if it's not fiscally responsible for you to blow a $300 million budget or $200 million budget, and you're only going to make $200 or $300 million on top of that, it just doesn't make sense. And if they're leading towards a team up, which clearly this movie kind of set up, we don't need to see Morbius until the Sinister Six. Like, we just don't need it. We don't need a Morbius 2. The story was so poorly written. I just don't understand who he would even fight. I don't know who his villain would be. It was a failed venture, but there's salvageable pieces from it. So you can take it and bring it into other IP.
I can see how, I mean, we were talking about The Incredible Hulk earlier, right? And that was one of the poorest performing films of the MCU, especially in the early years, right? And to the point of people were like, yeah, I don't need another Hulk film. I don't need that. Now we're all sitting here waiting for World War Hulk. I think you're right in that Morbius can be ported over to different IPs. I could easily see them doing a Blade film where Blade has to hunt down Morbius. That would be interesting. But remains to be seen, especially with how much Sony and Marvel want to play together. Because,
or if they want to team up. If Blade is having troubles like tracking somebody, and then he goes to Michael Morbius, and Michael Morbius uses that bat sonar. I don't know, like maybe that's a cool thing too.
Very, very good. Yeah. I mean, there's possibilities there, especially with Secret Wars. You know, we know a few years down the road, anything could possibly happen. But it has come time. So, Kev, who is your MVP of Morbius?
The MVP of Morbius, and this is probably an answer you haven't gotten, is the fans that trolled the producers into re-releasing the movie. And let me back that up. Let me back that up. Because the movie is pretty bad. Okay? It's not that bad, but it's pretty bad. If the fans hadn't kind of not bent the will, but if they hadn't kind of forced the hand of the studio to think that it was a success and they had to re-release it kind of thing, then they wouldn't have thought that they didn't have something. And they don't have something. They really don't. So if the fans hadn't made them basically re-release it, have it flop again, I feel like they probably would have already greenlit Morbius 2, so to speak. So I'm very thankful for the fans, myself included, that started the hashtag It's Morbin Time. And I'm glad that we finally put this thing to bed.
It is true, right? The studios could have easily, shaken off poor box office performance by saying, well, it was released, coming out of the pandemic and, at least try to save a little bit of face. But no, they tried it again. It flopped even worse. And here we are. I think you know who my MVP is.
Was he a former doctor?
He was a former doctor. Yeah, Matt Smith. I mean, if you haven't seen House of the Dragon, you're missing out. It is undeniable that Matt Smith is a phenomenal actor. Whether he's being Doctor Who, whether he is Milo in a really crappy vampire movie, whether he is Daemon Targaryen in House of the Dragon, you really want to figure out how powerful an actor is? Go watch him play Charles Manson, because it's scary as hell in that film in Charlie Says. Matt Smith is a phenomenal actor who looked like he was having a lot of fun on set. I'm surprised we haven't gotten the hour-long Zemo dance cut of Milo dancing.
Oh, we have.
From this film.
It was attached to the It's Morbin Time. Yep, it was all part of that movement.
Oh, dear God.
Yep. yeah. We've gotten it.
But yeah, Matt Smith, I think, was definitely the best part of this film. Hilsey, thank you so much for Morbin Time with me here. And to our listeners, thank you for listening to this edition of It's Not That Bad. Now, you guys know the drill. If you think there's a film that is unfairly maligned, or you think is so bad that we can't find anything good to say about it, hit me up on Twitter at NotThatBadcast and we will watch it. We will dissect it and we will find the good things to say, because we are looking for those A grades and B movies. And make sure you tune in next week, because next week is episode number 50 of It's Not That Bad. And man, have we got a special episode for you. Until next time, Kev, thank you so much again. I'm Jay. This is It's Not That Bad. Take care.
Hey folks, Stefan Shirazi and Renee Richardson here from the Metallica Report.
And we are proud members of the Pantheon podcast family, where the best of music and podcasts unite.
We've got something pretty cool for you. we're giving away an exclusive Metallica merch package worth over $250.
That's a whole lot of Scary Guys, skulls, M72, and other sought-after Metallica swag. And we've made it easy for you to win. Follow and share the Metallica Report, and you're in the game. Go to pantheonpodcast.com/Metallica, enter your email, and hit that button to be entered to win.
And just like that, you're eligible for our monthly exclusive Metallica merch package.
And guess what, rockers? You can enter every month, so just do it. And while we love our global brothers and sisters, the lawyers won't let us ship outside the U.S.